video is going to go over some of the key concepts and ideas that you read in the article about the 5-paragraph essay, Transferring Knowledge. Now, remember, that article is from a larger collection called Bad Ideas About Good Writing. So the idea that a 5-paragraph essay transmits knowledge is the idea that that article is critiquing. The article saying, in fact, that it doesn't. But let's look at some of the reasons why that might be. So we should start by thinking about what the 5-paragraph essay is. It's a format that's taught primarily in K through 12. So you probably have encountered it if you took any sort of a high school English class. It is comprised of a 3-point thesis. Each of the paragraphs corresponds to points in the thesis. And then the conclusion repeats those points. It's a really standardized form. And in fact, if you do a quick Google search of 5-paragraph essay, you will find a million different outlines and images like this one, and they're all exactly the same. They show you exactly what to do. The intro has a hook, which is a quote, question, statement, statistic, or anecdote. It gives background information, and then you give a thesis with 3 points. Those 3 points are then mirrored in the paragraph. So you have paragraph 1, paragraph 2, and paragraph 3. And then you repeat your thesis and you repeat your points and you give a final thought. It's always the same. So it's very, very standardized. The 5-paragraph essay is taught for a couple different reasons. First of all, it's a good early introduction to logical structure. It does actually show students that if you say you're going to do A, B, and C, then the body of your essay has to do A, B, and C. It's also very easy to teach and easy to grade because it's a clear outline. Students can kind of plug in their own ideas. And because you've provided that outline, you can go through and see if students have followed the outline. It makes it super easy to grade. It also has become kind of a standard because it aligns with the standardized tests that really came about in the 90s. So the more that students are being asked to produce writing in a standardized form on these standardized tests, the more that the 5-paragraph essay has been and has become the standard of how we teach writing in K through 12. So it does have some benefits. It's easy to teach and understand. It provides clarity. You know exactly what points you need to make, and it's easy to evaluate. There's a right way to do it and a wrong way to do it. But there are also some limitations to this. First of all, it requires 3 points, no matter what. If you only have 2 points, you better think of a third one. If you have 5 points, you better limit it to 3. Another limitation is they're short. They're 5 paragraphs, and paragraphs are usually not supposed to be more than about 1/2 to 3/4 of a page long. That means that a 5-paragraph essay is really going to limit you to about 2.5 to 3 pages of writing. It's hard to go on beyond that if you're writing good paragraphs. And then finally, it limits complexity. As I said before, you can only have 3 points, no more than 3 points. You have to have those 3 points. So if your topic is more or less complex than that, you're going to have trouble fitting it into that 5-paragraph format. Now, our article that we read talks about a really, really famous educational theorist named Paulo Freire. Paulo Freire is known for coming up with this idea of the banking concept of education. He came up with this as a response to the educational situation in his own home of Chile. So he looked at education and the education that was being especially given to the class of working class or peasants, which was different than the education that was being given to the upper classes. And he made the argument that education could become a form of oppression, especially if teachers saw students as empty vessels to be filled up with knowledge. He argues that in this version of education, where you deposit information into students the same way that you would deposit money into a bank, the students become objects then. They're not active subjects with their own thoughts and feelings and agency, but they just have to sit there and kind of accept whatever information they're given. That means that there's no room for questioning of knowledge or ideas. There's no room for questioning authority or questioning their own position. The banking concept requires memorization and an acceptance of facts. You'll see this a lot of times if teachers get up in front of a classroom and just lecture at you. They give you a list of things to memorize, and then the test just tests that memorization. And he says it's linked to class oppression, that it keeps the status quo in place. Because while you're being taught or given certain knowledge, you're not being taught or given the critical thinking skills needed to create your own knowledge. So Freire comes up with this idea of problem posing. Instead of the banking concept of education, where students are empty vessels to have information deposited into them, he sees students as agents in their own education, active and powerful in their own right. And he talks about something called problem posing. So problem posing education is harder than banking education because it really does require that students actively engage in their own learning. It encourages discussion between students, not just between students, but between students and their teachers. The teacher should be learning alongside the class. He says that the teacher has as much to learn from the students and the students' experience as they do from the books that they've learned from. And it means that the authority, both of the material and of the teacher, can and should be questioned. It doesn't mean that the students are going to rise up against the teacher, but it means that the teacher is not some sort of divine power that has all the answers. So like I said, there's a lot more responsibility on the student for learning. Learning isn't just something you're given, learning is an action that you do. So problem posing education is very active. Students have to be actively engaged, but he says that with problem posing education, that's where students have the possibility for freedom and liberation. So these are some big concepts that he's throwing out. And his seminal work, The Pedagogy of the Oppressed, is a text that most teachers are going to be very familiar with. They should have been taught in their educational classes because it's about 30 or 40 years old at this point. And it's really become the status quo for how we should think about education. However, we still have that 5-paragraph essay. And in fact, that 5-paragraph essay has become more and more used, especially as standardized testing becomes prevalent. So the article that we read for class talks about the 5-paragraph essay as a form of this banking concept of education. And they talk about this because they say, look, the 5-paragraph essay assumes that there's only one way to write an essay. You're either right or you're wrong. You're doing it right or you're doing it wrong. It's limiting your thoughts, right? It's limiting them to fit into a certain pattern or a certain number of ideas. And the 5-paragraph essay doesn't require questioning. You just have to regurgitate and repeat back 3 things that you found out, which means that it can actually work for factual overviews and information, but what it can't do is work for college level writing that requires inquiry and requires critical thinking. So we are going to be moving on from the 5-paragraph essay in this course, and for a lot of the reasons that the authors of the article talk about. One of them, and the most important probably, are these kind of requirements and expectations of college level writing. College level writing requires questioning. It requires critical thinking and inquiry, not just the repetition of facts. College level writing is often longer than the 5-paragraph form. If you're trying to limit yourself to that 5-paragraph form, you're going to either have wildly unreadable paragraphs that have way too much information in them because you're making it longer, or you're really going to be limited by page length. But another reason, and this is our next project, is that college level papers require synthesis. A lot of time 5-paragraph papers are taught where you give an idea or a claim, one of your points, and then you give 1 or 2 quotes to support that. But there's no necessary requirement for synthesis where you're taking multiple sources, integrating them together in support for a claim. And the other really important reason that the 5-paragraph essay limits you is that it really doesn't help with transfer of learning. And we talk a little bit about transfer of learning when we talked about reflection, but college level essays assume and encourage transfer of learning. With the 5-paragraph essay, you can just write it and move on and never think about it again. But the information you're going to be writing and wrestling with to write your college level work means that you're going to need to transfer that knowledge to future classes and future situations. And the work that we do in this class on college level essays can be transferred to any other class because it's much more flexible. So hopefully that helped you understand the article a little bit better. It has some tricky and tough concepts in it, so I would really encourage you to go back and reread it carefully with this new information in mind. If you have questions, don't be afraid to reach out at any time.